G'day and welcome back to another Dbz Dokkan Battle video. In this video we are going to take a look at the Ultimate Clash for this month. So obviously, as always, Ultimate Clash is a series of boss fights. We pretty much just go through them and talk about the strategies for each boss. The best bet is always going to be to use a mono team. We have the added benefit of being able to use the new Easy Aid Ginyu Force to take out the first stage, so it's going to be even easier now. Generally, I'll use the Ginyu Force for the first stage, and then I will always make sure that I take two different kinds of mono teams. Usually it's one super, one extreme, but obviously with Golden Frieza having resistance to extreme type units, generally I take double super of whatever type Frieza is. Frieza's type will always match the first fight, so if General Tao is AGL, that means Frieza will be AGL. So pretty straightforward from there. Obviously with General Tao things are relatively simple, so there's nothing too crazy to go through. He doesn't have any special gimmick. He's basically just the equivalent of a pretty easy Dokkan event boss. The first stage generally is quite a write-off, so for new players who've just got their first category teams, or maybe have been playing for a little bit, or you've just unlocked Ultimate Clash, don't be too concerned. The first stage you should be able to handle relatively easily. So everything should be pretty straightforward. The next fight will be against good old, well, yeah, Vegeta, and they have reduced damage. They do have immunity to being stunned. They do nullify ceiling effects, and they cannot have their attack and defense disabled. They are relatively tanky, but if you take a team that is more crit orientated, you should be fine. Or you take a team that basically just bursts them down. Realistically, they're not super tanky, being as they're only the main boss for the first stage, so you shouldn't have too many issues. Maybe take an extreme physical or super physical, depending on which is weakest for you. Always keep your stronger team for later. So generally, that's a pretty good go. Obviously, we've got quite a few of the LRs in this team. Pretty nice combination of the Android support LR alongside the physical cell. Does quite a lot of damage. As you can see there, Vegeta not too terribly tanky. Everything is relatively easy to see here. In terms of Ultimate Clash, obviously the best way to prepare for Ultimate Clash is probably to do the monotype SBR and ESBR. If you do the monotype SBR, generally that gives you some idea, or you develop some kind of monotype teams, and you can further refine those by challenging yourself on the ESBR. Because there are 10 stages, one for each typing, it generally prepares you to have teams that can match up to Ultimate Clash, with probably an ESBR caliber team required to take out Frieza. And you know, he's not as hard as an ESBR, he can just hit relatively hard like one. But other than that, there's nothing too crazy to him, so you shouldn't have that many problems. So I suggest going to SBR, trying out the monotype SBR, or at least building a team for the monotype SBR. That way you have a rough idea of what kind of team you need to build to take on the Ultimate Clash. As always, Ultimate Clash nets us quite a few rewards, which we'll go through shortly. Obviously, we're now on to stage 2 here, and the first fight will be against Trunks. Trunks reduces received damage, it has immunity to being stunned, and disables attack reduction. You can lower his defense and seal him, but it's not too much of a concern. He does have the ability to double super within the same turn, but it's very rare and he's not too tanky. As I was talking about rewards, obviously Ultimate Clash nets you quite a few stones, pretty much 30 stones every time it comes around. It also gives you quite a few potential orbs, a couple Kais, some money, and some dozing Kais. So it's a relatively well worth investment of 20 or so minutes of your time. Best part about Ultimate Clash, you don't have to do it all in one sitting. You can take on whichever bosses you feel like taking on at the time, and then of course return back later, as long as you have at least finished that boss. If you lose, you do have a fair amount of backup units. It's just going to depend if you know which sections you'll struggle on. So it's always best to watch one of these videos, or at least check the typings of the bosses before you take on the stage. That's going to help you the most, because it's going to enable you to at least have an idea and prepare for what's going to come around next. Obviously, for people like me who are veterans of the game, our boxes are very full of variety and widely dispersed, so we generally have quite a good complement of units with which to defeat stages. But there are some really good free-to-play options nowadays that work really well in sync with other cards and can provide really solid foundations to work off of. There's at least 1 or 2 good free-to-play units per every single typing, so you shouldn't really have, you'll have problems at bosses for sure, but you should always have some kind of backup option that you get from the free-to-play system. So that is Trunks done, and we'll move on to Oob. Oob reduces received damage, immunity to being stunned, can't be sealed, and can't have his attack lowered. Again, Oob is somewhat tanky, but you generally should not have that big a problem. If you really want to, you could focus on attack lowering if necessary, but generally a crit based team will get the job done. But Extreme Int is relatively powerful as a monotype team, so you shouldn't have that big an issue with taking on Majub. In terms of Majub, obviously this is based on the LR card. No, it's not based on the LR. No, it is based on the LR card. So yeah, but either way, straightforward. I've never really had a problem with Oob. First and second stage, obviously for me, are generally never problematic. So it's not something that I would say you are going to be that concerned with. I would say from stage 3 is always where you start to actually need to contemplate what units you're taking in, and prep a little bit, as they're a little bit more gimmick focused or boss mechanic focused. They actually require some sense of planning, so that is something to be aware of, but beyond that there's nothing too major. We'll have good old Kid Buu here, who's the 130% type lead. Obviously the mono type leads are going to help you a lot when it comes to this Ultimate Clash. You know, units like Buu, units like Cooler, units like pretty much Goku SS4, Vegeta SS4, Gogeta, Int Gogeta, any unit like that that's a monotype lead that will enable you to run your team under at least one congruent lead, give them some decent key, and especially now with the EZA's 130% stats, it's going to help you quite a bit. So just keep that in mind. The next one obviously is good old Lord Slug. He reduces received damage, has immunity to being stunned, can't be sealed, and he also recovers HP. His HP recovery is somewhat annoying, but it's not anything too major. You shouldn't realistically have that many problems with Lord Slug. His healing is okay, and it happens relatively often, but it's not too massive. It's not like 4 or 5 bars of health. It is 2 or 3, but it occurs once every 2 turns, or once a turn roughly. It's not that crazy. You shouldn't have that big an issue. Take your weaker AGL team and you should be fine. Your weaker AGL team, 9 times out of 10, will probably always be the extreme AGL team. It's just not as strong as the super AGL team, or at least from my side, it's definitely not as strong, but it'll be more than fine. There's some good free-to-play options. You've got this Cooler here, very solid free-to-play option, necessary for the Prime Battle Goku and Frieza EZAs. Very powerful. You can get him from the Bubba shop, and you can EZA him with an EZA area. He pairs nicely with some of the Wicked Bloodlines units, so everything is pretty straightforward from that aspect. You've also got, in terms of leads, you can use things like the Zamasu's an extreme type lead. You can use Broly, you can use, that's pretty much it. You can also use Super 17, who is the extreme AGL lead. He's relatively good. His damage increase happens over time, but he's pretty good, pretty solid as an option, really good defensively. So there's plenty of options for the team now. Generally, I like to run this team, mainly just because I can run the Goku Rose and the good old Zamasu. So pretty damn cool. I like it a lot. So that's probably my favorite Extreme AGL team to run for Ultimate Clash. Just seems to do the quickest amount of damage I can get them to do to clear out the event, and that's realistically all I want, because that shortens the length of my videos, so that does help quite a bit. So that will be stage 2 done, and then we will move on to stage 3, well, level 3 I should say, and that is where things start to get at least a little bit interesting with the boss's mechanics. So we'll take a look at that shortly, and we will start with the Vegeta. So obviously at stage 3 you do tend to run into a little bit more strategy needed. So for example, Vegeta can't be stunned or sealed, but of course Vegeta does fire off a super attack as every single attack. So that is something from Vegeta's side. So generally what you want to do is you want to kind of build a team that either has sustained healing, or you want to build a team that has high damage reduction, potentially evasion as well, but I generally find damage reduction to work better. Vegeta's super attacks don't hit mega hard. They don't do like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of damage to somewhat relatively powerful units, but you know, unfortunately the best kind of strategies to go with something that focuses on damage reduction. A unit like Pan is great because the amount of healing that she does generally will heal over the damage that Vegeta can do with his super attacks. So generally just having B Pan on her own and a normal super strength team should be enough, as long as you keep Pan on main rotation. You won't run into too many issues. So yeah, basically that is something that you're going to want to focus on, but beyond that, nothing else too crazy. This Krillin unit here is also quite a strong unit. He's got, you know, damage reduction when he guards, and because he's always fighting a physical unit, that guard's going to always activate, which makes him a very good tank as well. And he is also a free-to-play unit that you can pick up from the Baba shop, so that's pretty helpful as well. So those are some options that are somewhat decent in terms of, let's say, improving your team that you're going to take in here. Beyond that, just take in whatever you wish, whatever works for you, whatever your strongest units are. You just need damage to chunk down Vegeta with all the other units. But between Pan's healing, Krillin's tanking, you should have enough defensive viability from the free-to-play options to kind of take whatever you need. Obviously, don't take anyone that's super weak defensively, in case you have to force them into a position to take super attacks, but it's highly unlikely because generally Vegeta attacks in 1 or 2 slots. He doesn't attack like 10 times, and he doesn't lock your units in place, so you should always be able to move whatever unit's the absolute weakest out of harm's way, and then you'll be more than fine. So yeah, realistically not too much of an issue. You shouldn't have that many problems coping with this boss specifically. In terms of anything else, obviously if you're using an extreme strength team, maybe a unit like Android 21 is a good healer. She provides some source of healing, and then of course you do get some healing from the Majin Buu unit, so a unit like Buu or Super Buu might also be able to help. But that's really it. Since you can't seal or do anything else, it's in your best interest to essentially focus on healing and damage reduction. You can see here Vegeta does about 61k to a unit that's got just under 100k defense. So yeah, it does hit relatively hard, but nothing that's going to make you pull out your hair over the ridiculousness of how hard he hits. So that's Vegeta done, and then we'll move on to the second fight here. This is against Goku. Goku is different. Goku reduces received damage, grants immunity to being stunned, and disables attack and defense reduction. Goku will have a countdown to a one-hit KO, well, essentially a one-hit KO unless you have a unit with really high damage reduction like Frieza or SS3 Vegeta. Otherwise, your best bet is to seal up Goku. There are plenty of great free-to-play physical options. The LR Master Roshi from the Anniversary and the LR Great Saiyaman 1 and 2 from the Friend Summons are both great units that provide support to a good physical team, are solid free-to-play options, do decent damage, and also seal. So realistically, you have plenty of options to keep Goku in check. your best bet for a physical team, either SS3 Gotenks as your lead, or you rock the all types lead from the Kid Gohan from the ESBR and SBR, or you can run Vegeta as well. It's just going to depend on what you have in your box at any given time. You can also run technically the Gifted Warriors Kamehameha leads, Goten and Trunks with Krillin. If you want to, it just depends on what's in your box. As long as you can bring Master Roshi, you're probably okay. As long as you have one sealer, you're okay. Having two is ideal. Having two means you can keep one on each rotation, and you should be able to keep Goku sealed up permanently. Having one means that there is a risk that before that unit can seal again, they could potentially be taken out. So, pretty insane. But yeah, all entirely up to you and how your box looks realistically. So yeah, not too concerned about the team build. I think everything's working pretty fine. Obviously Goku himself, like I said, he does that one hit KO. It does a massive amount of damage. You can block it with damage reduction units, but sealing is going to be the easiest and just best bet. You don't want to waste your time realistically, trying to consistently keep Goku only hitting your damage reduction unit. It's not going to happen. It could just hit any other units. So sealing him keeps him in check, keeps everything contained, and just prevents you from pulling your hair out and like preying on RNG, which always feels like a mechanic that you want to avoid in Dokkan, because RNG always kind of leaves a poor taste in everyone's mouth. And then yeah, beyond that, everything's more than fine. We've got this UI Goku here, who also provides support to the Master Roshi as well, along with having some evasion in case we do get into a tight spot. There really are some really good free-to-play physical options. So free-to-play physical is starting to become one of the stronger free-to-play teams, and I think that's more than fine. Nothing wrong from that aspect. So really good to have. And we'll be able to wrap up Goku here with an attack from Vegeta, and then we'll be able to push on into the final two bosses before Frieza. So everything going smoothly, nothing going too awry here. We're not running into too many brick walls or having too many struggles. Everything seems to be going pretty steadily. So really happy so far with our performance. And yeah, we'll take on Cooler next. Cooler is basically an upgraded version of Lord Slug. Nothing else really too much to say about him. He just heals a bit more and he heals a bit more often. But beyond that, he's relatively the same. A super int team will be our best bet here. Your best super int options are going to be units like the SBR Goku. You can also use something like the Great Saiyaman. Very, very solid unit against extreme types, and since Cooler is extreme type, he'll be really good there as well. But there are plenty free-to-play options. It's just going to depend on what you're focusing on. Your only real issue is if Cooler supers you. Cooler can the super twice in one turn, and it does do a fair amount of damage. It also lowers your attack and defense, so it can be somewhat annoying. So you do just want to keep an eye out on that. But other than that, everything is fine. Cooler just heals quite a bit, so there's no real way to prevent his healing. So you just basically have to outpace his damage. Obviously, the best bet to go with is probably to go with additionals if you're running a mono type team, just because that's going to give you the most net damage. If not, otherwise just go for criticals. It will do a lot of damage, like you'll see here with Goku. So really it's just going to depend on what you have in your box, but generally speaking, it should be fine. If you want to, bringing a unit like Ghost Tanks, free-to-play Ghost Tanks, will help because he's a good source of healing. And sometimes battles against Cooler can be a little bit of a war of attrition, so having some kind of additional healing does help you just stay comfortable, I want to say. It keeps you from becoming uncomfortable in terms of your health. You don't end up running too low and starting to take some gambles. So realistically speaking, probably your best bet is to bring some kind of healing. Like I said, the Ghost Tanks is definitely best free-to-play option, since he recovers on Rainbow Orbs and produces them, and he's alright defensively after he supers, especially for Ultimate Clash. He'll be more than fine. So a solid option there if you do need one for healing, but other than that, pretty much nothing else that I would say is too mandatory for this team. I would definitely say bring a super int team, more just for the reason that it's got some solid free-to-play options in the form of Giru, Great Saiyaman, and Ghost Tanks as mentioned previously. Whereas I think the Extreme Int team is still lacking some solid free-to-play options. It has some really great ones, like the Final Form Frieza, but he really excels against Goku units, and that's just not here for him. So the conditions just aren't there for him to produce his best results. So I would definitely say that you should go with Super Int for Cooler, and then leave Extreme Int for the earlier parts of the event. So yeah, definitely try and focus in on that, but other than that, you should be more than fine. Don't really see too many issues, especially if you're healing. You should be able to out War of Attrition Cooler. So once that's done, we'll be able to move on to the Hydrogeddon, and then from there we'll be able to move on to Frieza. So only one more sub boss, obviously Cooler a little bit longer than the others. It's that War of Attrition style gameplay that he brings with Hydrogeddon. The best bet you're going to have is just additional attacks. Realistically speaking, he has a pretty annoying evasion mechanic, and that's really about it. He does hit semi-hard, so you don't want to bring units that are glass cannons, but you do need units that have the ability to fire off additionals. If you fire off additionals, you have more chance to hit him, because the more attacks you fire, the more chance one of them will hit him through his evasion. That's really the system. Fortunately, AGL units naturally have some additional in their hidden potential system. It's their borderline, or it's their baseline, so it's something that is helpful, but try and focus on units with their passives featuring additional attacks. Even a unit like Berta, the free-to-play one, even though we used him in the first stage, something like his ability to hit additional attacks while in second or third slot will assist you more often than it won't. So I would definitely say that you should focus in on that, and everything should come together from there. But beyond that, there's nothing else to really focus on. As you could see, Hydrogeddon did some decent damage to Gohan, but once you get some hits in, he really does take some decent damage. He's not terribly tanky comparatively to the other units. So yes, he does be a nuisance, but it's really dependent on your luck on the day. Sometimes he can be one of the more annoying bosses. Other times you can hit like 3 attacks in a row and he dies. So it's very difficult to evaluate how hard this fight will be for you. But generally, if you bring some additionals, you should be able to out DPS him. In terms of if you want to bring heals, you can bring something like the SS2 Angel Goku, who will keep you topped up, but that's not too necessary, I would say. You could definitely probably get away without him. So yeah, that's going to be entirely up to you. And as you can see, there's Hydrogeddon done. So we got very lucky. He dodged only 1 attack, I think, and we basically finished him pretty quickly. Only 1 minute 24 seconds. And then finally, we are left with Frieza. So Frieza, he reduces received damage, of course, immune to being stunned, immune to being sealed, immune to having his attack and defense lowered. He will sometimes seal attacks, and also he takes massively reduced damage from extreme type units. So with Frieza, it's always best to go for a super based team build. Obviously, if you are going with an extreme team, it's not impossible, but it's just pointless. Like, unless you plan on overhealing and overstacking and just taking forever, it's pointless. And with only 30 charges, realistically, it's just not worth it. So rather double stack when you're building for your team. Go for something like a double super tech team build, and you should be more than fine to go. You'll see here that we're building into our super tech team. An important thing to be aware of is that units like Caulifla, who are traditionally super exceptional units in terms of these type of events. This is the movie bosses, or the Frieza from the Resurrection of F movie. It's not the Frieza from the Tournament of Power. So you're going to kind of need to not rely on that Caulifla. In terms of the tech team, you've got a couple decent leads. You can use something like a Hybrid Sans lead in the form of Tech Gohan. You can use one in the form of Trunks, who's a really solid lead as well. You can use one in the form of, well, pretty much anything. Goku, Trunks, there's a whole variety of units that you can use. So yeah, there's plenty of units that you can focus on to get a really solid team build out here. There's a lot of viable units. The Tech Goku, the God Goku is really good. The Tech Blue Goku is really good as well. The Tech God Goku, the reason why it's so good is he has 70% damage reduction against movie boss enemies. So when you're fighting Frieza, because this is the Resurrection AF Frieza, you actually just don't take damage from him with that Goku. So that's obviously really good and really helpful. The fact that you're able to essentially take no damage does help a lot of things. So I would definitely say that he's a really exceptional unit to use. You have a lot of orb changes as well to provide some healing, which you can see me utilize here in this video quite a lot. And beyond that, I think everything else should be fine. The big issue with Frieza is obviously when he super attacks a unit, he tends to massively lower their attack and defense, which means his subsequent normal attack hits generally hit the unit quite hard. With a unit with high damage reduction, that's not so much of an issue because it doesn't really trigger any issues for them if they suffer a massive defense loss. And you can see here that we're getting some good damage in. Obviously we're managing to heal up quite significantly. Just be aware that you can run into some issues with your team builds, obviously. Just in terms of positioning, like you'll see here, I put the Goku and Frieza unit in first slot. Obviously they only gain a large portion of their defense in the second and third slot, or after they've supered essentially, but it tends to be the best option here. So you do have to just be somewhat careful when it comes to where you put your units and all those sort of things, because you just want to make sure that you don't run into any issues. Of course, Frieza will super attack our Oob. That's just generally how these things work. Frieza always super attacks the unit he's not supposed to, so that is a bit of a problem. Of course, we do manage to survive Frieza and Goku doing a very large portion of damage. Obviously a great free-to-play unit is this Master, Roshi and Tien. They generally are quite strong, and as long as they don't take a super attack, they can build up their defense to a decently high point. So that is really quite helpful from that perspective, something that obviously aids the Goku and Frieza as well, since they are a Universal Survival Saga support, and the Goku and Frieza themselves are obviously, we'll share some links with them. But we're relatively safe now. Goku can tank pretty much anything in this first slot, so we're not too concerned about him, and we'll get enough healing off of our orbs that we're not concerned at all about where we're sitting in terms of our health. And also Frieza's health is just not high enough that it's going to cause us any issues. So definitely something that, yeah, realistically quite happy about. So yeah, going to finish off Frieza here, and then that is the Ultimate Clash completed. So very solid performance. Not too many issues. The tech team is generally strong enough against the Frieza here, it seems, especially with the upgrade to the Goku and Frieza unit, making them 120% tech type lead. It is rather helpful. So yeah, definitely something nice to follow up on. A good chunk of rewards as well for finishing Ultimate Clash, which always helps. And yeah, that's about it from me. So yeah, thanks guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, I'll see you in the next one. But until then, stay safe and bye.